trans genocide going on, and you're dancing? How can you rest when so many people don't have basic rights, like the ability to exist and be comfortable in their own skin? This is violence. This is fascist coding. No, listen to me. Silence is violent. Are you listening to me? Why do you hate black people? How are you dancing when black people are dying?
Become a member at freedomtunes.com for exclusive cartoons.
Hi, I'm Nicole Hockley from Sandy Hook Promise.
Your ass! You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you. Now get up!
Good evening, friends. It's Friday once again, and we're here tonight to talk about some of the worst things in the world. That's right. We're talking NATO with somebody who is probably sick to his back teeth of talking about it. That would be that guy right there, Harrison Hill Smith from InfoWars, American Journal. And we're still waiting on Simon from Florida to pop in. He's probably sick to his back teeth of reading and listening about it, but
never. He will never get sick of that.
Yeah, he kind of lives for that stuff, and that's good because we need somebody to be able to stomach the bull crap that is NATO. And Ben, of course, is lurking in the background. Maybe when Simon gets here, we can get like a nice little 4-panel thing going on, but 3
like the
panels.
Brady Bunch, or
yeah, like the Brady Bunch or Hollywood Squares. That's what I was trying to think of, But it 3 panels just doesn't look very good on this setup. So, anyways, yesterday was the NATO summit, followed by the Big Boy Biden press conference. So, strap in, get ready, make sure your butt's been wiped because we are about to talk some shenanigans. So, Harrison, why don't you kick it off a little bit? Because I unfortunately had something come up in my life yesterday that I didn't get to pay any attention to it. I'm sure you covered it a lot. So, what was your impressions on the NATO summit? Or in other words, how fucked are we?
I paid less attention to the NATO summit than I did to the Big Boy press conference, to be honest with you. NATO, let's see, what is the latest with NATO? So the latest is that they're telling Ukraine there's probably not going to be any money for a counteroffensive this year. Not this year, maybe next year. So just hang in there for a little while and we'll get around to refilling your ammo reserves or whatever. Just insane. It's like not even funny. It's just literally like just like keep being attacked for like a year and then eventually we'll come around and give you more money so you can kill and be attacked instead of just being attacked. Pretty sick shit. Biden, I mean, it's pretty wild watching what's going on with Biden. Right. I mean, I knew as soon as that debate happened, like that would, because what happens every time there's a presidential debate, somebody writes a story or you see it posted the time that JFK debated Nixon. And JFK, people who watched on TV thought that JFK won, but people who listened on the radios thought that Nixon won. And this is like you hear it all the time. And I realized as soon as that debate happened, it was like, this is going to be one of those times. This is going to be one of those like iconic worst decisions of a presidential camp, but not even a bad decision, like an insane like unmasking of reality and the going down in flames of a president who had been ubiquitously praised prior to that. These are some historic times.
Right, but the difference between the JFK Nixon debate and the Biden Trump debate is like it's like you just said. People who watched it said JFK won because Nixon looked like sweaty and awful, and people who
Yeah.
listened to it thought that Nixon won because obviously right wing policy is just better,
Yeah.
especially in the 1960s. But the Biden Trump debate, it didn't matter if you watched it or listened to it. It was clearly obvious that Biden has something going on inside of his brain, or nothing going on
Or
in his
nothing
brain.
at all. Yeah. No, I just mean it was like historical. Like it's going to be a debate. How
Oh,
many
yeah.
presidential debates have there been? You don't really remember that many, but this is going to be like an iconic one. This is like a lesson for the ages. It's wild to see. It is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, there have been a lot of presidential debates that have had like wonderful sound bites come from them. But as far
Yeah.
as it being like the debate itself in its entirety being a historical event is, yeah, you're right. It is very not common.
Yeah, I was going over the timeline just in my head today on the show, and it was like, okay, Thursday, June whatever, or when was it? Because it wasn't last Thursday because that was July 4th, right? So it was the Thursday before that. So it was like he has this debate. The day before that, they're talking about cheap fakes and Biden is the sharpest man we've ever seen, and him being dementia-ridden is right-wing propaganda. He does this debate. Within 30 seconds of the debate starting, they had thrown Biden overboard. It was just like, all right, this is unsustainable. They'd known the entire time, but this finally was like, this is bad. This is really bad. We cannot pretend this isn't happening anymore. So then Biden sort of went on the offensive and was like, I'm going to do a ton of campaign dates. I'm going to do all of this stuff. Like, I think the big boy press conference, crazy. Like, they call it the big boy press conference. That's not a right wing talk radio moniker. The administration was saying we're going to have a big boy press. It's also fucking insane. So the big boy press conference was supposed to be this like nail in the coffin. It was supposed to be like a really good showing for him to where they could go, okay, so let's just forget those last 2 weeks. I know it's like a firestorm about is Biden mentally competent. We're going to do this big boy press conference. He's going to be brash. He's going to be fierce. It's going to put all the worries to rest. And then we're going to move on. Obviously, that failed in abysmal fashion. And it's been hilarious seeing Joe Biden try to like make a bunch of public appearances to prove how competent he is, only for every single event to have at least one horrifically embarrassing video. Oddly enough, usually having to do with black people, right? There's the one of him skipping over the black girl in line.
Yeah.
She's like happy. She's like ready to meet him. He just doesn't even look at her and her face just drops. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. He's caressing that other dude. He's shaking hands with that black guy and he's like caressing his arm. He's like petting him. Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
So horrible career-ending debate performance followed by 2 weeks of desperate public appearances, every one of which backfires, sort of capped off by this big boy press conference that was entirely scripted, and that was horrifying. This is what I'm sorry to keep going off on this, but it's so funny to me. It's so hilarious that this is the world that we live in, and that they're calling it the big boy press conference. And if the debate had never happened, this press conference would have been like the debate. Like people were saying, well, Biden didn't like shit himself on stage. So this was, a pretty good performance actually. And it's like, no, this was good performance for Joe Biden. This was good performance for this horrible dementia-ridden man who didn't either literally die on stage or, just something horrible. For the president of the United States, this was a solid F performance. Like,
Yeah. Taking in
this-
context of the fact that this man is supposed to be running the United States of America, that you're right. This is a failing grade. And it is. It's unreal. And we are lucky.
Grounds for expulsion. Forget the failing grade. This is grounds for kicking you out of the goddamn school.
Yeah. Skipping right past detention, right past just right to leave. You are not welcome
jail.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was an unreal thing to watch. I listened to Bongino today, and he was saying that it's like a reverse shit sandwich where the middle or the front part of it was awful, and then the drugs must have kicked in, and the middle he did okay, and then the drugs kind of wore off and he did bad again. So it was like two pieces of shit sandwiching together a slice of bread or something. It was just awful. And and you're right. Like if the debate hadn't happened, this would have been the one that ripped the mask off.
Exactly.
So before we jump, we got Simon in here now.
What's up, Simon?
His mic might be muted.
Yeah, we're not hearing you.
But yeah, if before we jump over to him, this is this kind of leads the path to two potential paths that I've been kind of seeing coming as far as the nominee coming up for the next election. And if I was better at going back through our old shows and archiving things and knowing which one I said this in, I've said it in a couple of shows, but I think that one path forward that's going to happen is going to be they're going to frame him as some kind of a George Washington-esque character where he bows out due to personal health, and he's seen as this like magnanimous guy that's putting the country ahead of his own personal glorification. And it's like, I'm bowing out because I'm not healthy enough, and they're going to clap and say how stunning and brave it is that he's putting aside the presidency of his own volition, and it's it's going to be this wonderful thing, and that's how they're going to frame it. And he's going to step aside, and they're going to at this point, everybody's saying Gavin Newsom. I don't see a path forward for Gavin Newsom because of just, for one thing, the abysmal debate that he did with Ron DeSantis. That alone should have completely torpedoed any chance that Gavin Newsom has. Because if you can't stand on stage and debate somebody who's as terrible a stage presence as Ron DeSantis, Ron DeSantis' policies are usually really good, but his stage presence is awful, right? If you can't stand up there and debate with him on that, then you're not going to be able to. Yeah, you're not going to be able to stand up there with Trump. So Patrick
Bateman and Michael from The Office. I don't know. These two characters: Gavin Newsom, the American Psycho, and Ron DeSantis, the corporate cutout. It's,
but at least Patrick
not the most
Bateman,
compelling matchup.
At least Patrick Bateman had enough charisma to pick up chicks in a bar before he took them home and murdered them brutally. But anyway, so I've been agreeing with Roger Stone that it's going to be Michelle Obama, and a lot of the people who are in the political know are like, oh, there's no way that Michelle Obama is going to. She doesn't want it. She hates the spotlight. Blah blah blah. Well, newsflash, it's not up to her. You don't have to be a political pundit to realize that whoever that they put in the presidency is not the one calling the fucking shots.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to be Michelle Obama, whether she wants it or not. And they're going to come to this agreement that you're not really going to have to do anything. The media will shield you, and we will do everything that we can to boost you and make it so that you can get through these next 4 years until Trump goes away.
Well, yeah. Well, it'll just be, they won't even have to tell her. It'll just be the 8 years of her life where Obama was president. Obama will be like vice president,
Mhm.
and he'll just run everything, and she will be the first lady again, but she'll be
Yeah.
technically president and shake hands
Exactly.
with everyone. Yeah.
Right. She'll be a figurehead. Kind of like
Yeah.
what's going on with Joe and Jill right now, only the other way around.
Oh my
The
God,
other
dude.
the other path that I see forward is what I called into your show a couple of days ago, is that they keep Joe. And I sent Ben a graphic, and maybe he can pull that up here real quick while we're talking about this, but they keep Joe in. And the media keeps telling us how bad he's doing, how much in cognitive decline he is, and everybody can see it, and it is obvious. And then on election night, Ben, get the graphic ready. This happens,
Yeah.
and it is obvious that something is fucky. And once they get done doing that, you're going to have all of the courts from local on up to the Supreme Court are going to be so shit scared, terrified of mobs of black clad dipshits coming to their house that they refuse to see any evidence. You have people whose jobs it is to verify signatures and verify addresses and cleanse the voting rolls are just going to be like, oh, nope, secure, safe and secure election. Everything's above board. Everybody go home. Nothing to see here. And then what recourse does anybody have? What comes next? Because if the courts won't see it, the election verifiers won't verify it, what is anybody else's recourse at that point? And when I talk about how the courts are going to be so scared of rioting that they don't see it, it's going to be rioting one way or the other. And for all of their talk and all of their bluster and all of their bullshit about right-wing terrorism being the biggest threat to this country, the people in charge actually know that that's not us. Because on January 6th, that they like to bring up so much, the most heavily armed demographic in human history is the right-leaning American citizen, and nobody brought a gun to that event. So
Yeah.
violence isn't necessarily our thing. Now, if they pull that shit this time, you might see a different story unfold. But
Well, dude,
they
you're so right. Did you see the shit I was covering today about the Trump's lawyer talking about January 6th? Did you see any of
no,
that?
no, unfortunately, like I said, I had some shit go down in my life, and I was
Oh
unable
yeah.
to.
It's like blowing my mind that you're saying this right now. Today, I read an article. Somebody had reposted it. It was from a couple months ago, March of this year. It was Pat Philbin, who was a counsel, like a White House counsel under Trump. It was his testimony about January 6th and the lead up to it. And he literally says in his testimony, in the fucking court transcript, that Trump wanted voter fraud to be investigated. They weren't investigating it. So he was going to put in this other attorney general who was going to investigate, Jeff Clark. And Pat Philbin like knew Jeff Clark from way back and like reached out to him to be like, hey, don't take this job. Don't do this. Literally testifying about contramanding and undermining the orders of the president because he said, because it's a losing action either way, meaning that either you go to investigate voter fraud and there is none. So it's a losing plan. Or if you find voter fraud, mobs will burn the country down.
Yeah.
So literally what you're saying happened in 2020. It actually verbatim on the record happened in 2020 that they cheated. Trump tried to get them to investigate voter fraud, and they said we aren't going to investigate it because if we find voter fraud, the left will burn the country down.
I did not know that, and it's glad to see that my mind is still working in accordance with fucking reality.
Exactly. No, dude, like you honestly could not have nailed it better. And you're exactly right. And dude, they just let Trump back on Facebook and like Instagram or something. They banned him after January 6th. He just got back on today. people are saying like, oh, now these people are throwing Biden under the bus. No, I think it's a setup for exactly what you're saying. I think they want to do it again. They want to do January 6th 2.0, where they cheat. Trump posts, hey, they're cheating on social media. They take him down and use that as claims that he was calling for violence and fucking arrest him from the military.
Yep. Well, we can talk about that more towards the end of the show, because I think now we got Simon's mic issues worked out. And Simon, are you there? And can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Happy to be with you guys.
There we
Good
go.
evening.
There's our man with the
Hi there,
master
Harrison.
plan.
It's nice to have a chance to chat with you at length.
Seriously. So this is a rare occurrence here.
Yeah.
This is number one. I'll have to start keeping track now. What are you on, 76?
Yeah, we were on 76 on InfoWars last time I called you. That's correct.
That's right.
Awesome.
All
Ben,
right.
get in here. Get in here.
Number
Let's get our Hollywood Squares thing going.
Funnily enough, that a strange thing happened in relation to 76. Because obviously you said it was an iconic number in terms of like Alex saying 1776 is the solution to 1984, right? And for some reason, that number 76 was really resonating with me. So I started doing all the, people are into all these kind of Bible and numerology. And it turns out there's this thing called angel numbers. And 76 is the revelation of the divine pathway.
Very apt. Did not know that.
Yeah,
Revelation of the divine
after I was on with you for the 76th time, it was quite weird.
That's very cool.
All right. So, Simon, I don't know if you caught the very beginning of the show, but Harrison and I did not pay as much attention to the NATO summit as we did to the big boy press conference. So why don't you kick us off there with what you learned? How fucked are we?
It's pretty bad. I did watch about 18 hours of NATO talking in the NATO Public Forum, which was the public-facing short interviews and panel groups that they ran whilst all the bigwigs were in their kind of secure areas plotting the end of the world. And they had a lot of really interesting people. And to link in with your earlier conversation about the possible outcomes of the presidential election, Austin was there, and he gave an extremely presidential speech. He was the third speaker after Blinken, who was the opening one, who did it in an interview format. Then there was General Cavoli, who is the Supreme Allied Commander of the whole of Europe. He's the top operational general. And they both had, Blinken had 30 minutes, Cavoli had 15 minutes of a one-on-one interview format. And what struck me is the only speaker of the entire day who didn't get interviewed or wasn't part of a 3 or 4 person panel was Austin. He had his speech notes in a prepared DoD binder, and he stayed on message and sounded extremely presidential, had a very fluffy introduction, and took no questions.
So this is something
really interesting yet again.
So this is something that you've brought up on numerous occasions, and I don't know why it keeps slipping my mind when we all talk about potential alternates.
So he talked about strengthening America 3 times, and he had the 3 S's of making America stronger, safer, and more secure. And it really sounded like peace through strength, like Reagan. Really sounded like that. And I thought if you were cutting clips out, which the Department of Defense did, and put it on their website like within minutes, like a presidential campaign might, allegedly, then it was real interesting to see how they promoted him. And they didn't do that for Blinken or for Sullivan.
So from what, well, I was going to say, from what you were seeing there, how does he look health-wise? Because we know he had his big health complications. Does he look healthier?
He's way slimmer. Yeah, he's way slimmer. it was interesting how the introduction mentioned that he'd been a 4-star general, and then he said, yes, I served in the military 41 years. So it was really like publicizing his credentials. And whilst not mentioning him by name, he did allude to certain American people undermining confidence in NATO. So that clearly was talking about Trump. And then he talked about NATO's and Biden's foes and rivals. So you could say that Russia and China and Iran were the foes, but Trump was the rival.
Which is not
So
something that you would typically
kind of party political as well.
I mean, I watched part of Austin's speech, and the contrast between him and Biden was amazing. I mean, it's he's still my pick for the shadow president that's been pulling the shots all
And do you know what the betting, you can get 200-1 betting odds on him. I'm telling everyone I know, put $10 down. Like you can, that's like
that's a great idea.
Meal or something.
That's such a good idea.
If you can turn that into $2,000, you'd be pretty happy, right?
You know, honestly, that would be a brilliant. Like Lloyd Austin is a very brilliant candidate for replacement. Because my thing was that they're going to keep Biden because the signals coming out of the military are like in support of Biden. Like Milley came out and did a interview saying Biden is just as sharp as he ever was, and we interact with him all the time. So it's like, okay, these guys are backing Biden, and this was like very recently. So after a lot of people had, dropped it. But man, just replacing him with a general, and Lloyd Austin is clearly the top pick. And do y'all
Lloyd
know
Austin was on the board of Raytheon? He knows all the military industrial contractors.
100%, and he is a business partner with Anthony Blinken. Anthony Blinken and him own like an investment firm together and have for like 20 years or something, right? Do y'all know that part?
I think he'd keep Blinken on. I think he'd keep several of the cabinet on.
So we got a comment on the Facebook feed for once. Actually, it's a really big page. It's Liberty Memes over here saying, "Please stop disrespecting the sitting president. Divided we fall." You got it, David. We'll stop doing that. It'll be really
well. The only reason he's sitting is because he can't stand.
Exactly.
Well, there's a big push under conservatives. Push Biden. I mean, they don't want to get rid of Biden. I mean, that's kind of the meme going around right now.
That's why Trump is saying Biden should go now. Let's have Kamala, because it's like reverse psychology, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, they just have no one. Like I've been racking my brain trying to think of who they would replace it. And I don't know. You saying Lloyd Austin? It's like, ding. That's like light bulb. Like, yes, obviously, that would be the top option.
How much money he could get from the defense corporations?
Oh my God!
Into a super PAC. Like if they give him 1% of what they're channeling, that would be $1 billion.
Dude, he's black. He's anti-Trump. He's got 41 years of experience. Dude, that's very interesting.
I mean, it would look like a safe pair of hands, right? He was in Iraq. We could be at war at any moment. It's
yes.
It looks
them drumming up war and priming the American people to think that war is coming to make us more likely to pick a wartime president. I mean, dude, he's also seems like the type of guy that you wouldn't want a long time. You wouldn't want him in the public eye for a long time as a candidate. It is almost perfect to keep Biden in for as long as possible, and then at the last second slot him in, because on the surface, he's like the perfect candidate. I guarantee you, if you dig,
he's like the Black MacArthur. I completely agree with you on that assessment.
Yeah,
well, and a lot of their concern was, they'll lose Biden's war chest if he gets out. I mean, Austin could bring that in a weekend.
Yeah,
that's
seriously.
Wild.
Yeah, and that is an issue because in theory, if Biden and Kamala out, the money has to be returned to all the donors.
So they win, because right now the biggest thing pushing Biden right now is the fact that A, he has the war chest, and B, the donors are kind of pressuring him right now to either get his shit together or to drop out. So it's basically like, give me my refund. Excuse me. Damn. They're like, give me my refund.
Don't forget, he's doing this big interview. He's doing this big interview with Lester Holt on Monday, right? That's going to be broadcast at 9 o'clock on NBC.
Who is?
Biden. Biden's doing a big interview with Lester Holt.
Wonderful. This will put it to bed.
Yeah.
I'm sure this one will go really well and everybody will stop talking. Okay, I didn't know that.
But
sorry
to get
interrupt.
back to your question, I kind of went back to your show opener, but I know you wanted to talk about NATO. So there's 4 key documents that have come out. There's the 38 paragraph Washington Summit declaration that I literally went through paragraph by paragraph, picking out key words last night. Okay, and this weekend on Weaponized News, we're going to turn that into a 1-hour documentary. I literally do it paragraph by paragraph. And on this occasion, they actually numbered the paragraphs, which makes it a lot easier to refer to. Then there's an annex of that document that's 7 short paragraphs, and that's called the Summit Pledge. And they've pledged to give Ukraine over the course of the next 12 months an additional 40 billion euros. So that's roughly $44 billion. Okay. And then there's the NATO Ukraine Council statement that they put out on Thursday afternoon. And that's having promoted them last year from a commission to a council, which means it's permanently in existence and permanently staffed. Okay. So that was the kind of private meeting that Biden and Stoltenberg and Zelensky had, and they went into like the full session with the North Atlantic Council. And ironically, the name for that body is NUC, N-U-C. So I find that quite entertaining, frankly. You know, it's like the CIA doing shell companies, and it's like CIA in reverse. It's not very subtle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it was weird. The
And then-
AIC.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Consolidated Industrial Association. You're saying that the NATO.
There's one more document. Just let me tell you the 4th document. So that was the NATO Ukraine Council statement was 11 paragraphs,
and
I
that's
just
the
reviewed
nuke
that.
in UC.
That's the nuke, and I just reviewed that on the show tonight, and I probably spent 20 minutes on that. Went through all 11 paragraphs in detail, picking out the amounts and the key dates and the cross references to the other documents. And then the document that delayed the big boy press conference, because the NATO document was delayed, was what they called the Ukraine Compact. And Harrison, remember on some of the previous shows that I did with you, I had warned, like 1914 in the First World War, we were seeing all these interlocking bilateral security agreements.
Yes,
and I did like a 90-minute documentary recently talking about the American version that's been signed, which is valid for 10 years, which is all part of the Trump proofing process. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now they've got this thing called the Ukraine Compact. And that was where Biden walked out with Zelensky and the 20 or 21 other world leaders. And interesting enough, the document at the bottom had all the names of the countries. There was supposed to be in alphabetical order, but the United States was put at the top, even though it should have been at the bottom alphabetically, right? So that was a classic example of American exceptionalism. We actually kind of reject the alphabet, which is always kind of really based, as you would say. I mean, what the hell? We should invite... We invented our own gallon. We should invent our own alphabet. I'm surprised that hasn't happened already, right? Maybe that's something Austin can run on. And so we'll get rid of the R for Russian and stuff like that.
Yeah.
B for Belarus. And D for victory and stuff like that.
Yeah. The C or the K can be used.
What was interesting is they have now said that this compact, right, is mainly focused on building Ukraine's what they call the future fighting force. These are key terms that you want to look out for in future announcements, right? So it's Ukraine's future fighting force, which, as I described when I went through this document in detail previously, is the Ukraine Fifth Army, because they've already wiped out 4 armies in the last 2 years. So this is the Fifth Army, okay? So they're talking about doing this and training this army through the end of 2027. So we did the maths, which wasn't too difficult, fortunately, didn't involve any percentages. So if you're 12 and a half now, at the end of 2027, you'll be 16, so you'll be eligible for enlistment in the new Ukrainian fighting forces of the future. Doesn't sound, WEF at all, talking about fighting forces of the future, 3 Fs. And but beside that, they were looking to continue that support and training into, quote, the 2030s. And just going to January 2030 would, of course, be like a year into the next president's administration. So that does well and truly Trump proof it. And they're going to have to say, oh, well, if Trump pulls out of this, he's kind of like going to be repudiating the agreement of most of NATO and most of the European Union. So they've put him in a real pickle, which is exactly what was intended. And you've seen Macron and Keir Starmer, the new British Prime Minister, who've done interviews today, all saying, oh, Biden's fine. And, we talked to him for 2 days and he didn't get lost or poop himself very often, and it'll all be good.
So does that 2030 have any significance with the other Project 2030?
No,
Are they
it's
picking that number
into
on
the
purpose?
2030s.
Oh, okay.
So not even 5 years, like potentially 10 or 15 years.
It's just one of those little happy coincidences that everything seems to be done by 2030.
Yeah.
Well, no, quite a lot of those dates are being shifted now. So when they had the SCO summit in Kazakhstan, which was at the beginning of the week, just before the NATO summit started, right? They were talking about the 2035 SCO Strategic Development Plan. And then if you look at the Organization of Turkic-Speaking States, which basically goes from Turkmenistan all the way to the border of Bulgaria, that Azerbaijan and Turkey are trying to form this basically like a caliphate that all speaks Turkish roughly. They're talking about full unity, merger of all those countries by 2045. And when they had their meeting that Orban went to, and he claimed that was his 3rd peace trip, he said that he went to Russia, China, that meeting, NATO was number 4, and then Trump was number 5. He actually named them, and he was literally counting them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he's there in an observer capacity at the OTS. But Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, and this was bold. He was saying, we haven't informed, propagandized, whatever phrase you'd like to reinsert, our publics enough, and we need to explain to them that our 20-year goal is the total unification of all of our countries. From Turkmenistan to the border of Bulgaria. That's a long way. It's basically a strip of Turks.
Wow.
But in order to make that a contiguous line with no gaps, no breaks in the chain, it involves them seizing another key part of Armenia. And what's interesting is we had Samantha Powers was there at the beginning of this week, and then one of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of States was there yesterday and today. And she's actually there for several days. And she literally threatened on video the Georgian prime minister to his face, despite the fact that she's like 6 ranks junior to him.
What'd she say?
She was saying that if you don't want to be sanctioned to hell, you've got to back off this foreign agent registration law. And what people don't understand is the American version of that has like a $50,000 fine and like 5 years in prison if you violate the FARA thing, which is what they're prosecuting Menendez for, right? And the Georgian version, it's like a $900 fine and no prison time.
Like, oh no,
it's like a joke.
Well,
$900. She was that mad about that.
But they're claiming that that's going to crack down on the like 30,000 non-governmental organizations, many of which are backed by America, like the NED and the International Republican Institute and Voice of America and all these kind of organizations who are either like shareholders or financial contributors to all these NGOs that have already tried twice and failed to do a color revolution in Georgia, and now appear to be pushing really hard, along with the French-born president, who didn't even move to Georgia until she was like 40 years old, who is now trying to get them to go into NATO and into the European Union. And she's trying to get all the opposition parties to merge together in a big coalition in order that they can do what happened to Marine Le Pen by having the minor candidates drop out. So it's a really stark choice, like democracy or Georgia dream. And remember, Harrison, how I told you about, unfortunately, I went very much against Jones' predictions for kind of like this huge right-wing swell in Europe. I said that they were going to get shafted in Holland, and we ended up with the former head of the Dutch intelligence services, who hasn't even been elected. He's been appointed as the prime minister, Dick Schoof. And then, of course, Marine Le Pen, even though she got 37% of the vote, she came third. And they're not going to have a hope in hell of actually forming the government.
Well, that was some shady shit, though, they pulled in France. I mean, it's within the rules.
I was covering that in excruciating detail, taking people through the French Constitution and this whole thing about triangulaires. So they have this system there where you can have a runoff vote, right? So nobody gets 50% plus one vote. So you don't win outright in the first round. And then in most countries, it's the top two, the same in California, same in Alaska. It's the top 2 people go through to the second round, right? But there they have this weird thing that if you get 12.5% of the registered vote, the total electorate, not the 12.5% of the people who turn out, but 12.5% of the registered electorate, then you can actually go into the runoff as a third place candidate. And the record for that in, I think, back to like 87 or 91, was 105 races out of 577 in their equivalent of the House of Representatives. Was the maximum that there'd ever been a third candidate in the second round, in the runoff round, right? It's mathematically possible that there's 4 candidates, but that didn't happen. So on this occasion, there were over 300 third candidates. So as soon as Marine Le Pen came in the first round, and she looked like she was going to be the leader of the governing party, and her 28-year-old sidekick, Jordan Bardella, was going to be the next prime minister, the leader of the New Popular Front, which is the super left, Green, Socialist and Communist coalition, he came out and said, any of our candidates who came third, we want you to drop out and transfer all of your support verbally to anybody who can beat Marine Le Pen's national rally candidates. And then the sitting prime minister, who's the leader of what they call the Renaissance Party, which is led by Macron, he came out and said the same thing. And then it was like 220 something or other of the left-wing candidates dropped out of the second round, which was unheard of. And then 88 of the Macron people, they dropped out of the second round as well. And so you can imagine in a three-way race that if those people had a minimum of 12.5% of the total electorate in races where where there was only a 50% turnout, that meant that they had to have got 25% to have even been eligible, because it's 25% divided by 2 to have a minimum of 12.5%, right? Because there's a difference between turnout voters and total registered voters in the constituency, right? So if you imagine that you're a third party candidate, you get forced by your leader to drop out the race, and you transfer 25% to either the government stooge or the communists who came second in the first round. Those people who came second, they suddenly get plus 15 or 20, and that's how they beat her in so many races.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, but what was it about this race that why were there so many third party candidates this round?
Because her vote share doubled, and the sitting government vote share halved, and the left wing formed a 4 or 5 party coalition, and we just hadn't seen those mass before in a first round. So it was really, really unusual. But at one point, the prediction for Macron's party was to go down to 3 seats, like the final election of the Canadian Conservative Party under Stephen Harper. They went down to 3 seats. They were basically extinguished. Right. So even though he lost a lot of seats, he went from like 250 to like 140 or something, roughly. He did fantastically better than had been forecast when he initially announced the election. Apparently, he only told his prime minister like 2 minutes before he went on TV to say, "I'm calling a early general election."
So was Macron playing 4D chess here, or was it just a happy little accident?
Well, the plan that they had played out twice in 2022 and in 2017 had worked in order to defeat Marine Le Pen, who had done very well in the first round in those presidential elections, which was separate from the House of Representative elections. Equivalent, French, they call it the French National Assembly, but it's our equivalent of the House of Representatives. They have a Senate like us, and they have a National Assembly, which is like our House of Representatives. And they have a lot of seats, so the constituencies are small. So whereas we have 435 representatives in the House of Representatives, they have a country that's literally like a quarter or less the size, and yet they have 577 national representatives.
I got to be honest, I'm kind of digging the French style. I mean, that is an interesting 12.5% of the total registered voters. I mean, that's a cool way of like keeping it to where you can't have total domination by just 2 parties. But then that's a good question. Was this the type of thing that could have been war gamed out and planned out and plotted? Because, you know, you just think about people like Alex Karp from Gotham saying, with this AI algorithm, we single-handedly stopped the rise of the far right. I mean, this seems like a fucking, hey, let's algorithm this out.
Well, like I said before, they had done this twice against the same woman on 2 occasions when she ran against Macron.
So they did do this back then.
They did. They persuaded all of the left-wing parties to vote for the centre-right rather than getting a far-right victor.
Right.
And in French,
far right. And they had to hold their nose while they were
far right, which is like a communist in America, pretty much.
Well, no. I mean, when you look at the history of her party, particularly when her father was running it, it was quite to the right, to put it mildly. But she personally really toned it down with the help of her niece, that very beautiful blonde woman who kind of flits in and out of French politics. And then going against Attal, the gay 35-year-old French prime minister, who's now the caretaker prime minister, while the left are trying to stitch up a coalition. Because what they ended up with was actually a hung parliament. So there's literally 3 blocks that have essentially, very roughly, 1/3 of the vote each. And so they either have what's called a minority government, what in France is called a relative majority, where instead of having the magic number of 289, they might have 250 or 260. And then a party helps them, not in a formal coalition, but every now and again when there's a crunch vote, like on foreign policy or the national budget or something like that, to save them from a vote of no confidence, right? Or there's what they call an absolute majority, which is when they have over 50%, which is the 289, half of 577. And then the third category, which is what we have at the moment, which is called a caretaker government, which is either the former government who are kind of like holding over, or it's possible for the French president to appoint what they call a technocrat government. So like the head of the central bank, the chief justice, some famous academics or something, and they're all non-political, and then they can be in office for 1 year. But the interesting thing about the French system, rather than say the Israeli or the Dutch or the Italian, where they can literally have elections like every 3 months or something, if they need to try and get somebody over 50%, is in France, once you've had an election, you can't have another one for a minimum of a year. And if the situation is really that bad, then there's 2 ways that the national president can declare a state of emergency and actually be a dictator. So he can either say that they have civil unrest, or he can say that they have they're under, it's technically called a state of siege. So they're like being attacked by like Russia or something like that. And a lot of people thought
or Germany, as the as history has shown.
Or Germany is the three times favorite as well.
Right.
Yeah, that was another possibility. And so people thought that maybe he would literally declare a state of emergency and just rule potentially for 3 years until the next French presidential election is scheduled, and that's not until 2027.
All the church burnings and property
Because
damage.
They get 5-year terms.
Yeah.
It's like America; they're allowed 2 5-year terms.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising.
That wasn't too tedious.
Too off in the weeds.
Well,
we're
just
talking about NATO and
out.
ended up. I was going to say we were talking about NATO and now we're off.
Well,
about
but
French politics.
Back it up just a little bit though. The Turkish, United States of Turkey concept is really interesting. I had not heard that, and hearing that makes a lot of things click as to the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict, as well as like thinking forward. Talking about going, planning things to 2035 or 2045, these sorts of things. Erdogan is not long for this world, probably. So I imagine that NATO...
He's term limited now, so he's only got 4 years to go.
So I imagine they have some full... Because Erdogan is very much play both sides sort of thing, right? Where he's like criticizing Israel and sending them weapons kind of style, right?
He's doing more than criticizing Israel now. I mean, he was slow to come to his current position, but he has, due to popular pressure... I mean, that was a $10 billion hit for him doing the trade sanctions against Israel.
Right.
It was very one-sided. They were selling a lot of concrete, rebar, olive oil, all kinds of things like that to Israel.
Yeah,
and
no, but that
relationship is really broken down now. But your point is well made. Both for Xi and for Putin and Erdogan, they're all in their 70s. And they're working on plans that they may not live to see the full fruition of, but they have confidence in their influence on their respective parties. That if they don't, funnily enough, we had Nikki Haley and Hakeem Jeffries both quoted from chapter 1, verse 9 of the book of Joshua, which is the situation where Moses dies, and Joshua is the son of Moses's closest confidant and aide, and he becomes the leader of the Israelites. And despite the fact that they've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, God then appears to Joshua and says, get all your people ready, and you're crossing into the land of Israel in 3 days after a 40-year wait.
Right.
So
what's the significance of that with Hakeem Jeffries and Nikki Haley both?
Because Nikki Haley had made that quote in relation to Trump. He's an old man. Go to the next generation, and I'll lead you to the promised land. And Hakeem Jeffries was making that quote in relation to Biden, saying Kamala or somebody else is the next generation, and they'll lead you to the promised land.
Interesting. Well, so if I was NATO, I would want. So obviously they want to overthrow Putin. I think they're pretty fine with Erdogan, but they'd want to
No, Harrison.
You don't think so?
Maybe you didn't notice, but Erdogan has formally asked to join BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in the last 2 weeks.
I know, but they're in NATO and they're doing. This is what I mean. Like they sort of play both sides, but like Turkey and Russia are bitter enemies. Like historical.
No, I wouldn't disagree. I would disagree with that.
Really?
As well. They seem to get on really well at the SCO meeting, and they need Russia's help to get into both organizations. Erdogan met Z recently, and this takes us back to the, I know you guys, possibly consider that I've got an obsession with this, but the big game in town, as Lavrov and Putin have told us, as recently as the 14th and the 21st of June, the end game is the Greater Eurasian Partnership. And that was even mentioned in the SCO summit declaration. So that's been woven in with the Belt and Road Initiative, and they openly saying we want to merge in the Arab League, we want to merge in the African Union, we want to merge in India, we want to merge in ASEAN, and they're saying it's going to be just this huge party. And even in the Chinese press, they're talking about the Mackinder theory of the Eurasian heartland from 1919 that Harrison, I've talked about with you on your show. I mean, literally, this stuff that I've been talking about like a year ago is now like in the Russian and Chinese media and saying this is what we're doing. So,
Wow.
I'm not boasting, but I've literally been, a year and a half or a year ahead. And there's only been Glenn Deason, who's a professor at the University of Southern Norway, and Pepe Escobar. And he didn't understand that a year ago, Putin had agreed with Z that the Greater Eurasian Partnership wasn't only going to be like tourism and business and culture and sports, but it was going to be, and cyber, like internet, it was going to be, and they specifically said this, that within the last year, they made the addition of military and political aspects to the plan because of the open confrontation with NATO and the realization that they needed like a Warsaw Pact 2.0 that would go from Vladivostok all the way to the Belarusian border.
Well, I think
NATO.
Like
Belarus. Sorry, I just point this out. So Belarus just got promoted to a full member of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Previously, they'd been an observer, and within less than 14 days of that happening, there are now Chinese army units exercising right up against the Polish border in Belarusia.
Well,
Meanwhile, we've got the Chinese, the Russian Navy. They're sailing off the coast of Alaska, going "Fuck you, we're outside 12 miles. What are you going to do about it?"
Right.
It seems to me like NATO and Warsaw Pact have traded places, though. I mean, NATO is pushing an ideology and a lifestyle anymore, And Warsaw Pact is just
the
a
whole of
defensive
the
treaty.
Warsaw Pact pretty much has joined NATO at this point. I completely
Yeah.
agree with you. And even you've got Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia. They're all flirting with the EU and with NATO. You had their defense ministers from all three of those countries at the NATO summit, all being bribed hand over fist to make sure they were ready to overthrow their prime ministers if the need arose, just as America tried to do with Benny Gantz when they had him come over. They thought they were going to swap him out for Netanyahu. But then he turned up to Washington, D.C. and he said, I'm not going to change like 95% of his policies. Like, I agree with it. And they were like, oh, shit, like we're going to have a coup. And then the other guy's going to be like exactly the same. And we're going to look like coup masters, which is not a good look at the moment. So but I mean, you had Garcetti, the US ambassador to India, in India yesterday, telling them in this period of confrontation, there is no strategic ambiguity. And despite me coming on the show with you, Harrison, and pointing out how Blinken had publicly told the foreign minister of India that they didn't have to make a choice and they could be neutral, the US ambassador went and said, no, like whatever you were told in February, that's changed. And now you have to pick a side.
Oh, good Lord.
And that's to the largest country in the world, 1.5 billion people. And
all right.
you saw when Jay Shankar gave his speech at the SCO, and everyone was like, oh, like it's an insult and Modi didn't go. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This guy's been foreign minister for 10 years. He's a PhD in international relations. He's a freaking genius, right? He will likely be the next Indian prime minister. And when he goes to that meeting and says, we're on an irreversible path to a multipolar new world order, that was not, I'm the freaking reserve guy and I'm going to sit here and like, everyone ignore me, please, because my boss didn't come. And then 2 days later, Modi turns up to huge celebrations and he's like hugging and kissing Putin. And then they give him the highest possible award, higher than the Congressional Medal of Honor, that's only given for exceptional services to the Russian Federation. There's like a huge like gangster gold chain that is a recreation of a order of knighthood dating back to 1689 that Putin personally awarded to Modi, the Prime Minister of India, who was like cock a hoot because now he's like a knight of the Russian Federation.
All right, so here's my question, Simon. If you were suddenly transported to the control room of the world, if you were, Lord Rothschild in his uncloaked reptilian form, like what? And you were evil, and you were evil,
and I had a choice between a hamster and a guinea pig.
Yeah, no, yes, exactly. If you were, assigned with like, okay, here's how the world, how it is. Here's your risk game set up. Your job is to establish a new world order and enslave humanity. Like what would be your moves over the next 10 years?
So the move over the next 5 years is to pretend that Russia and China, which they are literally publicly promoting, would follow Agenda 2030. So they're trying to humiliate Europe and North America into doing that first, which obviously is going to destroy their economies.
Right.
And then there's not going to be a national defense industrial base because there'll be no electricity in those countries.
Right.
Okay. And meanwhile, China's saying, we promise we'll do this in 2060. And India's saying, we promise we'll do this in 2070. But by that point, 1 or 2 generations in Europe will have been living in caves.
Exactly. Yeah. You guys do this for like 2 generations and we'll definitely do it. We'll definitely totally follow up on this.
But the Greens and the 20-year-olds think, hey, it's like X's on board. He promises that his son will do this.
Oh my God.
It's like these people are real stupid, right?
Gullible.
That's fucking wild. Yeah. I mean, you sort of, even after I asked you the question, I was just thinking like, okay, the thing to do obviously is nothing. Everything's just cruising ahead. I mean, clearly the left wing is clamping down in Europe, establishing more control, especially in places like Germany, where they're just like incrementally illegalizing the AfD and any other right wing party, flood the continent with immigrants, steadily forge these international coalitions that will form super states in a couple years, keep up the, war with between the two factions, keep the friction high, keep the conflict going. I mean, if they're already planning on funding Ukraine for the next, however many years, maybe that'll just be the battlefield for a little while, and that's where we'll just spend a bunch of fucking money. I mean, we're cruising. We're on cruise control. We're on autopilot.
Let me give you some two really critical things, right? Three. I'm going to be like Monty Python when nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, right? And he comes in, I have 3 secret weapons at my disposal. Then he goes 4. And then he goes, no. Then we come back in again. I have 5 secret weapons at my disposal, right? But in this case, there are truly only 3. So
the comfy chair.
I can remember all of them, having done that little mini skit. The comfy chair, that's right. Yeah, I mean, and with the pillow. Don't forget the pillow.
Yeah, the comfy pillow. Yes.
we had French 4-star General Levine, who's been heading up the Allied Command transformation. So he got asked, what are some of the things that you are most proud of having worked on whilst you were in this role for 3 years? And the first thing that he named was cognitive warfare. First thing, straight off the bat. And that had been abandoned, and he reintroduced that. And that's the whole thing that you and I have talked about, Harrison, about Merlin, the NATO AI cognitive warfare system, right?
Yeah.
He brought that in when he got into that position, right? He did the concept papers, he got it funded, he got it approved at the prime ministerial and presidential level, and he rolled it out last September. Okay, so that's the thing that he's most proud of. Okay, then they asked him, okay, what was the next thing? And he said multi-domain operations, including space. And in the NATO declaration, they were fiercing the Russians up about don't put nukes in space. Remember how even Alex was fixated on that for like a week because we had Mike Turner leaked that document, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and saying that the Russians had put nukes in space and we were all going to be blown up like at any second. And it turned out to be like complete BS. And it was like a distraction operation, right? So Mike Turner is one of the 4 Republicans who voted against Merrick Garland being held in inherent contempt of the House of Representatives this week, such that the Sergeant of Arms could have gone to his office and arrested him. So he's,
nice.
Really working for the deep state of Mike Turner, right?
Right.
And so then they had the chairman of Saab, or the CEO of Saab, and they also had the vice CEO of Oracle as well. And they were both, the Oracle guy was saying the military need to understand and the politicians need to understand that you're not buying weapons.
Wait, I'm hearing some crazy shit. Sorry, I can't really hear you, Simon.
Sorry, that was just a very loud car going past my house. Apologies.
Oh, no, it was like sorry, it was like a TV show playing or something. Sorry,
I don't know where that came from. So we have to ask the people who are listening in to turn down their electronic devices, please. So you can
that was just on host sounds.
Oh, okay. So I could hear it. All right.
So
sorry, didn't want to miss. I didn't want to miss what Simon was saying here.
These 2 top business guys. One guy was saying that you're not buying individual weapon systems. He said you've got to stop thinking about I'm buying 100 F-35s or I'm buying 50 tanks, right? And they said, oh, you've got to start now. The politicians have got to start thinking that they're buying a technological pipeline, and that the software is as important as the hardware. And whereas the hardware
subscription
might be designed for the last 30 years, you'll get software updates every 6 months. contracts.
So you're telling me it's the military industrial complex on a subscription service, basically.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what he was
Holy
indicating.
shit.
And then the Saab guy said, okay, so you're talking about rebuilding, like America is in Europe, what they call the National Defense Industrial Base. And Austin introduced that at the September speech he gave at the Reagan National Conference Center in Simi Valley, California. That was the first time that I thought he's going to replace Biden, when he started talking about how he was going to transfer trillions of dollars to the military industrial complex, right? And so this guy from Saab was saying, you're giving us like 1 or 2 year contracts. And now you've got to put his comment next in the context of how long America was in World War II. That was 4 years, less than 4 years, right? From December 41 until August 45, right? He's saying we want 10 to 15 year production contracts. So he wants 3 times as long as America fought in World War II as a contract. Okay, not an option, a contract. And then he said, you're assigning 1.5 billion euros, so that's like 1.7 roughly billion dollars, so not that much in comparison to the overall annual budgets for military, to helping us expand our factories, train extra people, incorporate new technology, stuff like this. And he says that number should be a minimum immediately of 100 billion euros, so 110 billion dollars. So this
sorry,
is to give you an idea of what these guys
was this
are
Lloyd
talking
Austin's speech?
No.
Sorry.
So this was the French head. He's
this is the
number
French general.
2
Okay.
guy in NATO on the military side.
Got it.
Levine. Okay, he was the French guy
Levine,
talking about cognitive warfare. Okay,
right.
And Levine literally means the vine. Okay, la vine, and not van like wine, but vine with a V, like where you grow the grapes on, la vine.
Right.
Okay, so he's stepping down. Somebody else is going to replace him, but they're not sure who. Like in a couple of months. Same with Stoltenberg. But we know who's replacing him. It's the former Dutch Prime Minister, the most World Economic Forum connected politician in the whole of Europe, Mark Rutte, who was the Dutch Prime Minister for 14 years or something, right?
Right.
And so he's taking over from Stoltenberg in October. And then Stoltenberg having now been given the Medal of Freedom by Biden, okay? And then the third guy who spoke, and he gave the wrap-up address just in 15, 20 minutes right at the very end. And barely anyone was paying attention to that because that was scheduled from 5:15 to 5:30. And while he was talking on stage in one room, all of the other presidents and prime ministers were on a stage in the other room doing the Ukraine compact. So all the press were watching Biden and Zelensky, obviously, right? But I went back and watched his full speech afterwards that was available on YouTube on this NATO political forum.org channel. And the incredible thing that he said there was, he said, I've been traveling throughout all the NATO countries for the last year. And he said, all these top politicians are telling me, we've given you all the money, but we can't give you all of the people. And he said, I've told them the problem now is the bodies. He didn't say the human capital. He didn't say the trainees. He didn't say the recruits. He said the bodies in English. So it wasn't even like a translation error.
Wow.
And then he went on to explain, and he said, you're telling your chairman of your Joint Chiefs of Staff or your defense minister, here's $100 billion, go and fix all of these problems. And he said some of them are technological problems, some of them are hardware problems, like we need more ships, we need more tanks. He said, but a lot of it is we don't have enough recruits in the Air Force or in the Navy or in the Army. We physically need bodies. And then his extraordinary statement, and this will alarm all of you, whether or not you've got younger children or older, since they seem to be looking forward like 15 years, is he said, and when I say that, in peacetime, we need to have the conversation now about conscription, reserve duty, and mobilization.
Yep.
And this is the top general in NATO, in public, in English.
Well, we give China crap for their loans that they do for infrastructure, but we seem to be doing the same thing in kind of an end around way to Europe. So I don't know that we're
I
blameless.
don't think
there.
America's giving a lot of money. And interestingly enough,
Well, America's not, the military industrial complex is, but
well, you know, this guy Sikorski, who's the Polish foreign minister, he was the one who boasted on Twitter when the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was blown up, and he actually put a picture of all the bubbles coming out of the ocean, right?
Thanks, America.
So that was literally the message he put out. You remember that very well, Harrison. And so he was asked by one of these panel moderators when there's like 3 or 4 of them on the stage, and there's somebody like from CNN or the FT throwing them like, you know, softball questions to see if they can hit it right out of the car park. And she said to him, if you were addressing the American population, explaining to them why NATO is a good thing for America, what would you say? And he said, well, I've got 2 versions of that. And he said, you know, I've got a long kind of like international relations, like professor answer. He said, but putting it really bluntly, we're buying billions of dollars of weapons from you. That's what the Polish foreign minister said on the NATO stage.
well, and Tucker Carlson,
Which
did
is
you watch
true.
that?
He
Did
wasn't
you watch
lying,
that interview we did with that supposed oligarch from Russia? I mean, he basically called out America for looting Europe, you know, through energy and other things.
They're not. Looting isn't quite the right phrase. And see, this is something that Professor Alexander Dugin, who, Harrison, I don't know if you've ever met him, but Alex has had him on twice, I believe. He's the philosopher from Russia, Alexander Dugin. The one
I've never met him, but yeah.
You've heard of him, right? The one whose daughter was blown up in a car bomb.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So, which was obviously intended for him, but he like threw her his keys and said, "You drive home first, and I'll get a lift or something." Right.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought she was also just active.
No. She wasn't the target. He was the target. It was his car. She literally said, "Dad, I'm tired. I want to go home." He gave her his car keys, and she set off, and the time bomb went off.
It was a Michael Corleone situation.
Yeah. So he's been saying that obviously Europe's been raping the world via its colonies for 500 years. And now what's happening is the 2019 Rand plan, which was not only for the breakup of Russia, but was actually for the deindustrialization of Europe, which we actually see happening. Lots of French and German companies, because of the high energy prices, moving to America, because if they're heavy manufacturing, the cost of production is like half.
Yeah.
So what we have is an industrial transfer happening, but it's not really in the form of plunder or pillage. It's very much and you know, I've talked about this on your show and on other shows in the past when I said, you know, you want to move a population, you shut off the water and the power, and then you can empty out the whole of Florida in like a weekend.
Yeah.
And you blame it on a Chinese cyber attack.
Yeah.
And we've already seen that tested in El Salvador. When El Salvador cancelled the tourism visas, the visa-free travel for Chinese people to come in, that a lot of their people were using to start the migration to America, they suddenly got hit with a nationwide blackout for 12 hours. And of course, they blamed it on the Chinese because they just cancelled their visa-free travel. But who knows who really did that? Because, you know, now everything is being masked. And interestingly enough, you know, you saw all these people talking about cognitive warfare and cyber warfare. And they're saying, look, you know, attribution is really hard. Like, these people are deliberately trying to mask what country these teams are working in. And interestingly enough, talking about this conscription stuff, just, you know, circling back, as Jen Psaki would say, guess what was happening with the, maybe you guys have noticed, maybe you haven't, it's not like a genuine test. The US Army head of training was visiting Finland for the last 3 or 4 days. And guess what he was there to learn about?
Would it be the Winter
What,
War of
Russian language
1944?
hacking or something?
How
No,
they
the
stopped
Finnish
Russians in
conscription
44?
model.
Oh, God.
No, the Finnish conscription model. He wanted to learn how Finland can go from a standing army of like 100,000 to 3 million in a month, because that's what they want to be able to do for the whole of Europe.
Because they're all fucking Finns. That's why.
Well, I mean, you know, there is a big kind of pro-gun, albeit not machine guns, but like long distance, like hunting rifles and stuff, culture in Finland, and that definitely helps. Plus the whole, you know, living memory of the Winter War, exactly as you said, Hobbs. So you weren't like way off base there. That was, you know, frankly, a very good guess.
Well, and
But
the fact
I
that,
just
like
find it
Harrison
interesting
brought
we've
up.
got American 3-star generals.
Well, I was just saying, like
We've
like
got
Harrison
American
brought up.
3-star generals going around learning about conscription.
Yeah, I was just saying, like Harrison said there when he said that they're all Finns. It's also the cultural and ethnic homogeneity of the country. You know, they've all got skin in the game dating back hundreds of generations. That kind of makes conscription a lot easier.
And it's all the same color. It's all the same color skin.
Yeah, and I'm sure. I don't know, but I imagine they have something along the same lines as Switzerland. I don't know why, but those two countries seem
Well, no, that's a
culturally
very good
analogous.
comparison, because apart from William Tell's influence with the old, you know, apple shot off of a crossbow, it is a small country that has lots of snow, and they have, even since World War II, they were the only country that sided with the Axis powers that was not occupied by either the Allies or the Russians.
Right.
They cut that crazy deal, first with the Russians and then with the Allies, and never had to pay any reparations. They gave up a little bit of territory and were basically left alone. A lot of people don't realize they joined, courtesy of Boris Johnson, something with Sweden called the Joint Expeditionary Force, which was to get all their navies to cooperate. So from that point of view, they had been prepping to join NATO since 2014. And Boris Johnson, orchestrated that after the Russians occupied Crimea. So he wanted to be able to turn the Baltic Sea into the NATO lake. And they had politicians and generals joking about how the Baltic Sea is now the NATO lake, and saying how they wanted to do that to the Black Sea. And the Russians realized they wanted to do that to the Black Sea. And that's why they wanted to make sure that, you know, Ukraine wasn't allowing them to. The Americans were going to open a Navy base on the west side of Crimea, and the British were going to open a Navy base on the east side of Crimea. And they were going to basically be able to surround the Russian naval base at Sevastopol. And that was part of the reason why they wanted the land bridge to go through the Donbass in order to be able to get to Crimea, both by sea, by bridge, and by land, by railway.
Yeah, but
Conniving bastards.
They're all connected over long periods of time. Like, unfortunately, Americans, no offense to you guys, are like reacting maybe like on a monthly basis. But some of these guys are scheming this stuff like a decade in advance.
Oh yeah, that's what a lot of.
Well, hey, I gotta go.
Oh, okay. All right, so we'll cut it off here then.
I gotta go. I was supposed to be out at 10.
It's pretty good.
Harrison, it's been a pleasure. If any of these issues you want to do a special on, you can always communicate with me by direct message on Twitter, and I'll try and make myself available.
I don't know if you can see the notes I'm taking here. Yes, this was very fun. This was awesome. Really, really appreciate the invite, and we'll just have to do it again soon.
Guys, hosts, if you want me to stick around for another 10-15 minutes, I'm available. So once again, Harrison, thank you very much for participating. I'm sure the other guys are extremely grateful as well.
Oh yeah, always,
Well, dude,
always good to.
Thank y'all. all y'all, thank you so much. This has been
Give
super
us
fun. Well, we'll
for
have to do it
anybody
again
who,
very soon. Have you guys on Moonbase, and yeah.
yeah, for anybody who doesn't know who you are, if they've been living under a rock, just go ahead and tell them who you are, where they can find you.
Harrison H. Smith on Twitter, aka X. American Journal each and every weekday morning, 8 to 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Infowars.com/show. Band.video. That's how you can find me. Thank you very much, fellas. This was super fun.
Thanks,
Can't wait to do it again.
All right.
Have a good weekend.
Well,
Thanks, y'all too. Bye, guys.
yep.
You guys going to stick around for a few more minutes? Do you have any other questions or things you want to talk about that you want to talk about rather than me talking?
Boy, we nailed a lot of it. We hit on Biden. We hit on Biden at the beginning, and you caught up on most of that. I mean, that issue's been beat to death by all the media all week long. So
there's one interesting thing that's happened today that you may not have had a chance to read unless you're particularly familiar with the Tehran Times. And their president-elect has written like a full page, like a New York Times full page personal article that he said, literally, I've written this is like our new national foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he's obviously supporting the axis of resistance against the aardvarks, which we do have to use that term increasingly frequently now, because particularly on Meta, they're real keen to ban you for making any aspersions. And he said we're going to continue our strategic cooperation with Russia and China, but he basically says we're willing to be a friend to the world. And he said we're putting our hand out in friendship, and if you bite it, then it'll blow back on you. But we're literally trying to be like India and be nice to everyone. So this is like a huge outreach to the Biden administration. And now we just got to see what their response is. Apparently it's going to be published in another newspaper tomorrow. And I'm going to read the whole article and then use that to make like a documentary with Sam tomorrow afternoon that we'll try and get out on Sunday. But
well, I'd like to see the alternate timeline where Iran is our strongest ally in the Middle East instead of the aardvarks in Saudi Arabia. I think.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, it's interesting because in the article he does actually thank the Chinese for mediating with the Saudis, and he talks about their look east and their good neighborliness policy that I've discussed with you in the past. I mean, frankly, I'm very grateful to you guys, one, for being willing to cover this kind of stuff in detail, and one other point, obviously tolerating me talking about them at length. But you are putting time markers down of, no, seriously, your show being one of the very, very few, whether you've got 100 listeners or 1,000 or 10,000 listeners, we together are covering these issues, and nobody else is giving you an account of the new Iranian foreign policy within 24 hours of it being published.
Well, they're probably not allowed to.
I mean,
it's probably on their
many of them, I'm sure they are. I mean, do you think during the presidential campaign they want to be discussing, the Iranians want to be friends of America, so why don't we bomb them on behalf of the aardvarks? Which was, this is not a laughing matter, the Israeli foreign minister, Mr. Katz, was at the NATO summit, and he was going around the room apparently trying to get people to agree to attack Iran. And the day after that ends, they're saying, we want to extend the hand of friendship and we'll be nice to everyone.
I just see him sending around with papers like in grade school. Will you attack Iran? Please mark yes or no.
Well, please mark yes or maybe, right?
Yeah, yes or maybe. But I'm down here and I'm sweating like crazy because I shut the fan off while the show's going. It's 100 degrees here today, so I hate to cut it short, but I'm about to get dehydrated.
Please, it's your show. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, and next, what do we got going on next week, Hobbs?
Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention it. I'll have to DM Harrison about this, but next Thursday, because you're going to be out of town for Friday, so for our regular Thursday This Week in Clown World show, we're going to have a guest host come in to talk current events with us. And if you're a fan of Harrison and InfoWars, you will recognize him. We're going to be talking to Matt Baker. He is on Twitter. He's at
Oh yeah, I know
slave.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's gonna be slave _ the number 2 _ liberty. So very similar to what we do. He's he's an activist, and they call him the West Coast's dreadlocked Alex Jones. He's a very big personality. He called me on the phone yesterday, and we had.
He seems to have concluded that I'm a Chinese spy.
Oh, really?
No, seriously, he's accused me of being a Chinese spy.
Well, we can hope.
So, and I said, well, I haven't received a container full of like Chinese strippers yet, so I'm really disappointed. You know,
Maybe some Chinese Kalashnikovs would be nice too.
Yeah,
I haven't heard
one
that.
Other thing that I should mention, which unfortunately is going to happen the day after your Thursday show, is on Friday, July the 19th. It was announced today that the International Court of Justice in Holland is going to issue not this Gaza court case that's been going on, but their final ruling on the legal consequences of the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, which dates from years and years ago, before it all massively kicked off. But they're saying that this ruling, which is an advisory opinion, could lead, if they just say it's flat out illegal, then basically any company that's been making products in those areas in the last 10 years could suddenly face bankruptcy with massive lawsuits.
So get your Tavors now, right?
Ruling. So that's going to be at 8 a.m. Nebraska time on Friday, the 19th of July.
All right.
So get your get your matzo balls stocked up before.
Yeah,
before
well,
that
because you might not be able to buy them from the West Bank anymore, so they might be limited edition after next Friday.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. I guess this is Hobbservations. I'll let you close it out, Hobbs.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. So thanks for joining us. It was, kind of more of a Clown World episode, but being Friday, put up the Hobbservations episode. Thanks for joining us on tonight's show. Hope you all learned something. If you did like it, go ahead, hit a like, subscribe, share it with your friends, put it out on all the social medias. That helps drive it forward. Maybe we can get this information out there. We're still a small outfit, but because we got Simon with us, we got a lot of hard-hitting information that would otherwise go over people's heads. Probably still goes over my head a lot. But if we can get it out there, maybe we can stop some of this insanity from going on. If you like us, you go ahead and hit a subscribe. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Twitter. The Twitter handle is at R2LPod on Twitter. I was very bad in naming that. That's my fault. But at R2LPod on Twitter. That's Twitter with an A. If you want to support us financially,
if you could please mention my show as well.
Oh yeah, yes, of course. Simon is at Simon from Flory, like Florida, but Flory 2, and you can also catch him on Weaponized News. That's at Weaponized News. They're also on Rumble here. It's at Weaponized News. They're also on Rockfin, Odyssey. They have a Facebook page. You can catch more of what he was talking about tonight. You can catch that like every day. He's with Sam Chaney doing exactly what he was doing tonight. So it's a wealth of information if you think you can fit it into your head. If you want to support us financially, you can go to Rhodes2Liberty.com. We have some swag over there that you can go ahead and buy. It looks pretty good, I think. Ben, you got anything else? No? You're muted.
I got nothing. I just got a closeout video.
All righty. So we'll play that. Yeah. We'll play that, and then we'll allow you guys to stay honky.
This is the back of the house, with Uncle Ted coming round the side to the front. And this is the Spanish Inquisition hiding behind the coal shed.
Oh, I didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition.
Spanish Inquisition.